we're live, just like that. Good morning, good evening, and welcome to all of our friends around the world. We're joined today with the one, the only, the amazing Layla Porter, also known as Layla Codes It. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you, David. How are you?
I am
lovely to be here.
I'm just fantastic. So I selfishly got to enjoy a bit of your stream this morning, and you are incredible. I was so amazed and inspired by just your ability to convey like technical wisdom and knowledge, and sprinkle it with personality and like the transitions and all the stuff. Like I was thoroughly impressed. So hopefully everyone subscribes to your Twitch because your stream's awesome.
That's very kind of you to say, so thank you. It takes a lot of work, so yeah, I've been working on it for quite some time now, but yeah, it's coming together now. So and I'm enjoying it now, which is important.
So you do streaming and you work for this amazing company called Twilio. You're an evangelist there, and we had Corey on, Corey Weathers, who's also a Twilio evangelist, a couple of weeks back, and that was an awesome episode. So can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. So as you can probably tell, I'm based in, the UK. I might not be based here by my accent. I could be living somewhere else, but I happen to live in the UK, just about 50 miles north of London. So I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I was elected to the .NET Foundation Board of Directors about 2 weeks ago now. So that's exciting news that I have to share. But yeah, other than that, I just hang out with developers, and I run a .NET meetup, which is great fun. And yeah, that's kind of me, I guess.
That's a lot. That's amazing. So let's double click real quick on the .NET Foundation election. So that just happened recently. So congrats, first of all, for that. That's amazing. And I heard that you actually have a meeting immediately following this stream, like your first official gathering. So I'm just curious, like, what are you guys going to talk about? What's the direction the foundation is going to go? Are you guys going to pivot, or do you not really know any of that yet?
I have no idea. I'm hoping that I'll learn some of that this afternoon or this evening. So yeah, it's kind of a handover. So I guess we might learn what our individual roles might be and how we're all going to work together. At least I know nearly everybody who is elected to the board. So that makes life a lot easier knowing people, I must say. So it's not going into a room full of strangers.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, let's see if we can't throw the link in there for the .NET Foundation site here in the chat so people have it. But what is the .NET Foundation? Like, is it like the foundation for all .NET things, or like what does that really mean? And it's kind of a term that some of our viewers may not actually be familiar with.
It's actually one of the things I'd like to clear up, because I think it's quite sort of ambiguous. I didn't really know what it was about, and I still have questions about what it's about. What I do know is that they work on a lot of open source projects. They sponsor projects, sponsor events. I've been involved with the .NET Foundation for several years because my meetup, my .NET meetup, is actually part of the .NET Foundation. So that's one thing that they do. They pay all the meetup fees for all the .NET meetup user groups all over the world, which is, it's actually quite a significant sum. So they have corporate sponsors, and the board, as far as I'm aware, are helping to guide the foundation, the direction of where they spend their money, the projects they support, the events they sponsor, and all of those things. They also want to make sure that we are bringing new members of .NET community to the foundation. So that's where I'm really excited. I'm quite an advocate for getting new developers, junior developers of all backgrounds into the .NET ecosystem.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, it's almost time for our checkup. So why don't we switch over to that and kind of transition into the start of the show.
So what are we doing for the checkup, Dave?
So we've got, besides my green screen messing up my hat, you see that? Angular, that's kind of cool. we've got a doc that we're going to share. And the doc is actually, I think, relevant to what our hallway track, it's going to be a great segue. But so with .NET Core, we have event counters. And this doc is pretty cool because, well, I helped write it, but besides that, it actually kind of lays out all the potential event counters in .NET Core. So they're lightweight, their APIs, they're cross-platform, and it gives you like a near real-time performance metric for querying different things about .NET processes. And it's similar to like the performance counters that were in .NET Framework that were specific to Windows. So this is just like a cross-platform, not equivalent, but enhancement. So,
as I understand it, Dave, this is a .NET Core global tool. Is that correct?
So there is tools that work with event counters. Event counters are actually not a global tool. So event counters are basically encapsulated within event source, and event sources are actually a C# class. So you have event sources that will aggregate many event counters, and event counters are individual things that will, like monitor CPU at a certain rate and things like that. But then they can be consumed by .NET counters, which is a global tool.
And for the audience, if we wanted to just briefly touch on what's a real world use case for this, you might be listening to Dave explain this and somehow trying to relate that back to your day-to-day work.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into this. So rather than just reading the doc, I prefer looking at code. So I actually have a quick demo to show. So we've got this diagnostic scenario, and we have, it's a simple web API from ASP.NET Core, and we have an event counter. So this is inheriting from event source, and we can name it, and we'll have a static singleton instance that we can access for it. And then you'll see that we construct an event counter here. So when we instantiate that, we give that a name of request time. We display the name as request processing time. The display units are milliseconds. And then we have a way to kind of log requests, and we'll just write that metrics. So this can actually be consumed from an action filter. So in this case, since it's a web API, we can say for every action that occurs, we'll start a stopwatch. And then when the request is done being executed, we'll walk up to the log and we'll say, here's the URL and here's the elapsed milliseconds. So to see that in action, we actually have the process running, and we can use .NET counters, which is a global tool. And if we hit PS, that'll actually print out all of the processes that are running that have event counters exposed to them. And these are just .NET processes that actually have this ability. So there's our PID, which is the process ID. And then we can walk up to that process ID and actually monitor it, given that sample event counter that we created, in addition to some of the already well-known defined ones. And if we hit that, it'll start listening for those specific counters. And over here, I've got the app running, and I'll just run some of these endpoints here, and you can see that these things update in real time. And I'll just hit F5 here a bunch. And these numbers on the side here, these are live metrics pulled every 1 second. You can adjust the frequency or whatever, but as you can see, we can monitor many, many different things, and there's a bunch that come out of the box. And you can get like the total requests, the request rate, so on and so forth. And it's really, really neat. And it's a great way to start monitoring and interacting with, and you can actually collect and visualize a bunch of the things. And I think that's a great segue for our topic of today, which is going to be the hallway track, where Layla is going to share a bunch of her efforts around this amazing workshop she's been developing for .NET Core. And the purpose of event counters is actually to monitor kind of real world applications, right? So with that, let's jump into the hallway track. The hallway track.
The best part of the show.
It's my favorite part.
I need to be awkwardly eating something. That's normally what's happening in the hallway track for me. Like, I'm just about to take something and someone asks me a question and I'm like, I'll just put this down. I wasn't hungry.
Layla, you've got food in your mouth. What are you doing?
Oh no.
Well, it is what? It's 5 o'clock by you, right, in the evening. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you again for agreeing to be on the show. And yeah, I would probably have said no if it was 5 o'clock my time, but thank you.
It's my pleasure. I'm not having dinner yet. The dogs don't get fed till 6, so it's not chaos quite yet in the house. So we've got time.
Cool. So I just wanted to ask, like, what is this workshop you're going to share with us? Like, and I've tried doing a workshop, and I know it's a huge effort. So let's take a look at that and talk about that. So
this was kind of my idea way back in, I guess, November. And we've got a lot of cool tools produced by the education team at Twilio. They're amazing, awesome things, but you know that people learn in very many different ways. So we have things like Twilio Quest, which is gamified learning. We have documentation. We have like hands-on learning. There's so much different things to do and try that suit all different learning styles. But I was in running a Twilio Quest workshop in Tel Aviv last year, and it was my first time there, and I didn't realize how advanced the developers would be there. And I found that everything we were doing was just kind of a bit demoware. It was very quick. This is how you do X in .NET Core or whatever language it was, because it was agnostic. And I thought, we need something meatier. So I started to think that, could I do a workshop? And I'd never done one before. So I was a little bit like, oh, where do I start? But it felt like a gap in our learning tools. So that's when I started to think about doing it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a huge undertaking. But to your point, it adds so much value, right? To be able to actually have something that is more real world and people can relate to, because so often you see just the demoware, like you said, and it gets old quick. And I've been at a lot of conferences where I've given demos before, and there's been feedback where it's like, this is just demoware, right? No one really likes that. So awesome.
Yeah, it was quite a big undertaking to do, because I needed to have something that would go and be translated across all the languages that helper libraries support. So it wasn't just go and do it in .NET Core how I want it to be. And I had to think a lot about, well, how would someone do this in Python? How would someone do it in JavaScript? And you start to think about all these different aspects of it. So that kind of made my head hurt. So I got a sales engineer onto the team to help me with that, which was really good, talking to developers. And I actually developed it on my Twitch stream. So I got feedback the whole time about what people would actually want. And from my experience in the field at conferences and work, and when I was doing like Twilio Quest workshops, people weren't sure how to bring different products together. So how do you bring SMS and email together, or notifications and things like that? So I started to think, what could I bring as a multiple product demonstration that people could actually learn from and produce? So it was brain hurting, I have to say.
I gotta say, Layla, I really like your approach there. One of the common things I see on our docs team is that we hear from customers that say, well, your docs are great, your sample apps are great, but there's one thing that's missing. So as soon as I start to integrate all of these different Azure services together into this .NET app, that's where the rubber really meets the road and the friction is introduced. That's sort of where the docs tend to fall short. It seems like you're trying to address that sort of gap with your workshop.
Absolutely, Scott. I mean, I was really inspired by all the Microsoft stuff, like Tailwind Traders and things like that. These big, massive integrations that you could keep on building on, and you could get a foundation of an application and then try and bring other products or other aspects of code. If you want to try out the latest feature or something, you've got this big machine already going with all the moving parts that make complex code complex, like actual application code. And you don't learn these things unless you're actually working on a user product in a company and things. And sometimes you don't have the freedom to just go and play on these big machines that you have in companies. So it's nice to have maybe the whole product, the whole project, and you download that from GitHub and you start building on top of that. So it's a nice foundation in that respect as well, if you don't build it from the ground up.
I think another thing, particularly at conference workshops, that people like to see is, start off with this monolithic application just full of anti-patterns and code smells, and try to improve upon the situation starting there, slowly walking the audience towards what a good application would look like, while also, driving home the points that you're trying to make.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I struggled with was what level would I pitch this workshop to? And that really boiled down to how I was going to deliver it. So there's things that when you are doing it in person that are much easier. So that type of thing of refactoring complex code, and you can take questions there. And I think that's easier to do at a conference workshop, as you said. But I started to build this just before COVID happened and all that lockdown. So I had to really pivot and think, well, I was going to deliver this in person. What can I do now? And how can I build this sort of workshop in a way that people can use without me there to answer questions then and there? So that was a big consideration. And I thought refactoring code at that big extent wasn't going to fly on a video as such. So I decided to build from complete scratch, right? .NET new, and that's where I went with.
That's awesome. So how involved is the application? You mentioned that you can't deliver it in person. So what's the expected duration? Is it something that is available online that we could go consume at our own pace and then kind of learn with, or how do you expect that to be delivered?
So it's actually about 4 hours of video content at the moment. So you can go in and get the free video workshops, and you go through its 5 parts, and each one is broken down into different parts and different aspects of the application. And it's also how I would iterate over it if I was writing it myself, which I did write it myself, but if I was going to refactor as I went along. So I brought that aspect into it to show how you can get the rough in. So how do I send an email? Get that in. And how do I send a WhatsApp message? Get that in, but then make that more efficient, more maintainable. So we had some big refactors as we went. So to answer your question, Scott, or your observation about refactoring, we brought that in as well, but in a slightly different way. We introduced not an anti-pattern as well, but maybe not the most maintainable way of doing code. And then I showed how we could refactor that into a better practice.
That's really interesting. And that leads me to another question here. So when Cam and myself are authoring courses for our Microsoft Learn platform, one of the things we often spend way too much time thinking about are things like, what are the prerequisites for this module? It's really a lot of thought that's put into around how do you set expectations for the students? And I'm wondering, how do you approach that with your workshop? How do you really set the expectations before the students jump in? Because, inevitably, if you don't do that, folks will be disappointed.
I completely agree. And one of the first things I say on the first video is that if you're new to Twilio or .NET Core, then go and use one of our other forms of documentation, such as Twilio Quest, to go and learn the small little pieces and those little moving parts, because otherwise people get too overwhelmed by coming in at the deep end. You want them to have their little armbands on first and learn the basics. So I called it out straight away. I said, you don't need to come straight in here. It might not be the best place for you to start. So I just made a note that you should have a foundation. You should have gone through Twilio Quest, have a good understanding of APIs, and have used .NET Core before.
It actually makes a lot of sense. It seems as though like most applications are developed that way, to where it's like now with I say the advent of agile development, but it's been the way for many, many years. But people will develop applications iteratively, and they'll be feature complete on one thing. And as they need to build out another feature, they may come back and refactor other parts that might depend on that, or contracts between there, or various ways to re-implement something or rethink about it. And I think that's very common today. So for you to have done it that way and kind of demonstrate it in that video series, I think that's perfect.
Yeah, I was quite pleased with that, actually. So I refactored everything out into a notification service, which I think everybody needs to communicate with their users. So I thought, well, if we refactor out into a notification service, that will handle all the types of notification and just abstract that away. That was like really real world useful. And that's what I wanted to make it, that people could take the code and the processes that I shared and apply that in their everyday coding as well, not just how to use Twilio. My thoughts behind it were that I wanted to help people write better .NET Core code, and that's where I came from. Not I want to sell Twilio products and show all these different things. I was very specific that I only chose a few products so I didn't overwhelm people, but that they naturally fit together. And I made it fun as well. It was all about cake. So who can't enjoy talking about cake?
That's amazing. So actually last week we had Chase Ocoin on, and he actually mentioned Cupcake Factory, which is his, it's like service proxy NuGet package. So I just love the sweet NuGet, like the fact that yours is about cake, like what is the chances that these two things are tying together? This is amazing.
It's also a big argument on the DevRel team at Twilio. There's a massive thing about cake versus pie. And I'm very strongly on team cake, because if you ask me which do I prefer, cake versus pie, being British, I'm going to go, well, I have pie with mash and peas and gravy. Why would I have a choice between cake and pie? Why not both? So awesome. Yeah, it was very deliberate that I went with cake as well. And I think when you have real world applications and analogies for people to code, and it's not abstracted away, I wanted people to be like, well, what do? You order a cake, then you'll get an invoice, then you'll get a message saying it's ready. So it just all seemed to fit with what I wanted to code. So it worked quite well.
Well, I just wanted to add real quick that you've never been to Florida, or like, specifically the Keys. Is that true? No. So there's this thing called key lime pie, and it's to die for. It's absolutely amazing, and I highly suggest it. So that would make you convert, be like, okay, pies, that's a thing.
I could be persuaded. I'm willing to try all of these things and learn to see if pie's for me. I'll try anything. So yes, I've only had key lime pie on an airplane. So that's my experience.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm still, cake is more enjoyable than pie in my mind.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's the ASP.NET, is it ASP.NET Core? So it's a website then?
Yeah, actually, this is quite an interesting thing, because I didn't know which way to go. This was quite a lot of deliberating on my part. So I wanted it to be cross-platform, because one of my big things is I try to code and demo a lot on a Mac, because so many people still come up to me and say, well, you can write Microsoft stuff on a Mac? They look at you like, but how are you doing that? Have you got Parallels on there? Are you developing on Windows? No, I'm right on the Mac. So I definitely wanted to use Core. And then there's this whole big debate over, well, Razor Pages is supposed to be more beginner friendly, but I don't know Razor Pages, and it doesn't fit in my head too well. I've had to learn Razor Pages in the last few weeks because I've been doing a lot of ASP.NET identity, and that uses it. But and then there's, do you want to go with the new and shiny? The cool kids are all doing Blazor. But then I thought, that's a whole workshop on its own. And when you start to bring in APIs, that might get too complicated. So that's why I went down with MVC. And I also thought, what are companies using? MVC is still probably one of the biggest things in production if people are using .NET Core. So I decided to go down that way, but it was a bit of a deliberation on that.
Well, and I want to call out, because that brings up a great point that comes up really frequently. A lot of folks ask me at conferences, they're like, okay, so Razor pages are what I want to go with for web UI now. MVC is deprecated, right? And I'm always like, no, it's not deprecated. Razor pages is built on the same stack as MVC. It's all the same stuff. It's just one more way of doing it.
Yeah, and I just love MVC. I love the simplicity of it in my mind. I mean, maybe it's not simple to other people, but in my mind, I think it's because it's what I've always done. And I like the separation of concerns. I like everything in its neat little boxes. Whereas Razor pages, with it all munged together, with the code behind, I never did web forms. So I think it's more akin to that. And I just find it really hard to find what I want and abstract things and reuse things. So MVC is what I'm most confident and most comfortable with. So it made sense to do the workshop in that.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, and I think, that's a tough question to answer. I think the best solution is to take a look at the intended audience for the content. If you're looking at folks who are new to ASP.NET and they want to build web UI, I think Razor Pages is a good path. But if you're talking to seasoned developers, who have used ASP.NET before, or maybe they're heavily invested in MVC, well, then yeah, MVC is certainly the way to go.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, if you're doing net new development, MVC, Razor Pages, or even the Blazor stuff, you're not going to go wrong with any of those, tried and true. I mean, Blazor is like, totally greenfield. But I was going to say, you mentioned web forms, and there's even older stuff like, ASP.NET Classic and stuff like that. So if you're doing net new development, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, I actually, the first time I looked at code was Classic. I didn't really do much with it, but that was the first time I looked at it. And then I sort of had a look at MVC a little bit and learnt what object-oriented coding was. And then I went straight onto ActionScript. So the first proper code I learnt was ActionScript.
Oh, wow. That's cool. That's a nice transition. I like that.
Yeah. But it's amazing how many companies still use web forms and Classic. Where I live, there's so many companies still hiring web form developers and needing people to be able to support Classic applications and old processes as well. So they're still very valid skills, but I don't want to do those. I'd like to do what I'm familiar with, which is often just MVC.
Yeah. So our good friend here at Silicone Orchard says that he was doing new classic ASP.NET microsites in 2015, and I apologize sincerely. That is painful. I don't feel your pain, but I can sense your pain. Like, that's not good.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine that. And like with VB, or I mean VB script, I guess it wasn't even actual VB, was it?
I think it was VB script. So I last touched it in, I want to say, the year 2004. And as I said in the chat, at the time I didn't mind it. But if you would have asked me back in 2015 to do that, my response would be, I'd rather be unemployed.
That's amazing. Oh
dear. I think Silicone Orchard chose that route as well. So Silicone Orchard is actually my other half. So he actually was the one to teach me Classic way back when. So yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know a lot about the trials and tribulations of that. So we're a very .NET household here. So yes, it's fun times talking about all the terrible, terrible code we've had to look at over the years.
But I think a testament to terrible code is actually a lot of people discredit this too. That's actually a great way to learn, because the more mistakes you make in programming, the more you're hopefully learning from that, right? You're seeing like, ooh, this didn't work. And then, but why didn't it work? So next time I do something, I'm not going to do that, right?
That's so true. So my very first job in development, I was working on an MVC application. So I was a junior developer. And I kept wondering, I was working on this, there were loads of dashboards and we were giving lots of figures. It was for event management. So they wanted to see how many signups there were, how many tickets were printed, et cetera, et cetera. So I was looking at these dashboards and I was like, why are these figures for the same thing different? So I started to go through the code and I saw that they were doing the same data query, just straight data access in different places. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And they were doing includes on some and, different parameters on it. So I was like, right, let's start to bring this out into one place. And so I started to teach myself good practice just as a junior developer, because I was working on badly architected systems. So you are so spot on.
Awesome. I see that Scott had left us here for a second. Oh, and he's coming back now. Others can't see this, but it's one of those things with live streaming where you get to see kind of behind the curtain and experience all those little nuances. That's awesome. Cool. So you said November is when you started this workshop. So are you still actively developing it, or do you think it's kind of almost like done? And
so stage one of it is done, which is the video workshops. And now I'm hoping that it's going to be successful and I get to do a sequel. So on stream, I'm actually working on the sequel, which is why I am doing so much with identity at the moment and trying to implement that, because I want to show how we can now add identity to this application. And that's going to be workshop 2. There's also the other ways that the workshop can be used. So when I originally came up with the idea, it was like, well, it could be in person. I could write challenges that people could do at hackathons. So a whole load of use cases and user stories that we could give hackathon attendees. So these would be sort of business developers, not like student hackathons. So internal company hackathons. We could give them use cases and say, well, you need to be able to send messages via WhatsApp and send invoices on an email and things like that, and give them the challenges and enable them to build out the application in their own way, but also if they get stuck, see how I built it. So that was another way I'd like to do it. I guess then in real life, actually giving it in person, I think that would be really lovely to do a day's tutorial on that. And actual documentation as well, step-by-step hand-holding, lead you through it, how to build it in written documentation. So I think there's a lot of different ways that I can use the content I've already created and deploy that even before I go on to the new content. But, I'm already on the new content, so we'll see.
Oh, that's amazing. Like workshops that are typically delivered are either half day or full day. That's the only length I've really seen at conferences. Is this probably a full day?
I guess so. By the time you've gone through it, I mean, I've been doing it, and I think I've got it down to about 4.5 hours, but that's me without questions, without interruptions. So I think a full day will probably be that. And I think that takes a lot to work up to. I've got friends who've delivered workshops. They do 2-day workshops as well. And I think, it's a huge undertaking. So I maybe consider doing half day first and cutting some of the content so it's easier to deliver. But yeah, I'd like to give it in person if we ever do in-person events again.
So I'm curious, Layla, when in-person events are safe to do again, would you change your strategy at all for delivering the workshop from the format that you're using in this new era that we're living in?
No, it's a very good question, Scott. Thank you. I guess I could add a few more things into it, maybe start with some tests. So one of the things everyone always ribs me about is one of my most successful conference talks is all about TDD, and there is a test in my workshop. So you've got to think about what people can get done in the workshop, and what aspects you think people will be able to achieve. Because I think the main thing is you want people to achieve it and feel successful. So I'd want to make sure that the content I had everything available for their success, and they weren't leaving it feeling disheartened because they couldn't complete something. So I guess I'd want to do run-throughs to make sure it was achievable in a day, and that would be my only caveat. So I'd probably do it that way.
Yeah, I think part of the struggle with like the developer conferences and delivering workshops is that there's such a different pace. Like each individual person will take a certain amount of time to digest a lesson, or like how do they implement something, and like the skill levels vary so much that it's you gotta give yourself plenty of time, and typically you'll have helpers that kind of help facilitate that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm excited for what Scott was alluding to. Like, hopefully the world's going to get better and we'll be able to do in-person stuff again.
Yeah, and I bring that up because I know it's something I personally look forward to, being able to deliver things like breakout sessions and workshops in person again. There's just something to be said about being able to interact with humans in person and getting real-time feedback.
Though I kind of have a little bit of anxiety about that, actually, though, because we've been able to do like new things like this stream, for example, to kind of fill in that gap that we're missing with like the actual hallway tracks and the actual conferences. And I'm hoping that these types of channels stay really popular and at the forefront, like right alongside the in-person conferences when they come back.
Yeah, I'm in that same boat, Cam. I am loving how one can connect with so many people all over the world on these very informal, friendly platforms, because I think YouTube is very curated, it's very structured. You don't have that live interaction with the presenter. Whereas on these platforms, on Twitch, we're having a chat in the chat with viewers. You can bring viewers' perspective into it. And that's one of the things I love most about delivering content on streams is it's the people you meet. And it's not about how much code you get written. It's just about all those people that you're chatting to and talking to. And I really hope that continues as well.
Our good friend Joe here is saying that watching facial expressions when you're talking to see some, like if your points are being made, I think that's crucial too. Like that's one of the downsides of this streaming aspect is like we can see each other, right? And luckily we have this show format where we have 4 people on a given time, so we can have this kind of natural hallway conversation or hallway track conversation. But all of the people that are watching us, we don't get to see their facial expressions. And maybe that's some sort of enhancement that could be made. That'd be awesome.
Sometimes, though, I've delivered talks. It depends on where you are. So I've delivered talks in Eastern Europe, and you'll be standing up there, and it's like 500 stony faces looking at you, and you're like, should I just leave now? And then you get rave reviews. So sometimes people just have this stony face, and I can find that quite off-putting, and I almost start to stumble. I'm like looking at this sea of faces, and they're all looking bored. And when you're streaming, you can't see those people that have fallen asleep or are checking their phones. So I think there's 2 aspects of that. Although I do like those light bulb moments you get from people in person. You just see them like, yes, that's just the little tip that I needed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I gave a talk in Eastern Europe. It was actually at Sofia, Bulgaria last year. And I had speech translations with SignalR, where I could have like this bot that would tell Chuck Norris like nerdy jokes, but then it would utter it from the browser in translated Bulgarian. So then I was able to connect with them, right? And they were all those, it was DevReach. All of those blank faces you mentioned, for example, were just crying, laughing. Like it was a great thing. So you got to figure out little little tips like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, with Twilio, you could like text them all simultaneously or something, right? Have them sign up and then,
Yeah.
some sort of joke or something, right?
Yeah, I have a Chuck Norris bot that,
Yeah.
sends you Chuck Norris jokes. That was my first ever app, actually, was
that's awesome.
writing Chuck Norris. So Chuck Norris has and the Chuck Norris APIs have a special place in my heart. When I was learning to code properly, that was the first API I used. So yeah, Chuck Norris is very special.
I use that one all the time. That's awesome.
For me, I think again about in-person events, and when folks ask, what do you miss the most? It's the hallway track. The hallway track being that unconference, undocumented venue where people form Pac-Man shaped circles and just talk about, it starts off as banter and you talk shop and problems are solved, new job opportunities arise. You form lifelong relationships, friendships. It's just an amazing opportunity. That's why I attend conferences.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, because as a .NET meetup organizer, that's something I've really missed. And I actually don't think that meetups translate to the virtual world. For example, I got my job at Twilio by attending a meetup and meeting people and talking to people. And now we've got all these virtual meetups, they're all on Zoom. Yes, you can see everyone's faces and there's open chat channels at the end. But what about the people who would have just come up to have a private word with you after you've given your talk and just say, oh, I really struggled with that. And, this has really helped. Or can you help me? I'm really struggling with this. And I think people don't feel confident enough to speak out in front of everybody on these Zoom multi-chats. So I think something that has really suffered from the virtualization of everything are these community meetups.
I think that brings up kind of an interesting point that maybe we should even be better at, is making sure that the audience and like your meetup groups or whatever have channels to communicate privately with you if you have questions or whatever, because a lot of folks, you're right, don't feel necessarily comfortable asking questions in front of other people.
No, I haven't thought about ways to better improve it, because what reminded me of this is Silicone Orchard has posted this, because we talk often about that. And I spoke at a meetup yesterday, and that was a particularly good meetup. Lots of people asking questions in the chat. Lots of people were happy to turn their mics on and ask me questions. But I've been to some meetups and I've given a talk, and at the end I'm like, oh, anyone want to chat? And I'm hanging around and there's nothing, no interaction. All cameras are off, which is absolutely fine. Not everyone wants people to look into their homes and they might be in their pajamas. But it makes you feel like, why am I doing this? And then everything's recorded and put online. And I think I'm doing this to go out to communities and meet people in that community where they can't travel and they can't actually communicate with each other. It's about getting people together over a slice of pizza and chatting and laughing. And I think you just really lose that on the virtual side.
So for your .NET meetup, do you still have like a monthly, or like what's the cadence? Do you still do like a virtual thing?
Yes, we have been doing monthly ones. We always break in August. Normally we'd have like a dinner. We always have a break in August and December, and we do a community dinner instead. So we've had some great speakers, which is amazing. We've had them from the US and Europe, and it's opened us up to lots more speakers who normally I'd wait for something like NDC London and grab people who are coming to speak at that. So that's how I got Scott Hanselman last year to speak at my meetup group, and I got Richard Campbell this year because I'm like, you have to be in London and you could come to Bletchley Park and speak at my meetup group in the evening. And I managed to sweet talk them into coming. And that's great because we have excellent turnout, loads of people. But I just think there's something that you lose about all just joking. And as you say, that Pac-Man, people opening up the conversation, eavesdropping on conversations as you walk past and go, oh, I've experienced that. I mean, it is nice to have the virtual meetups, but there's always the loud voice, not loud, the strong voices who always speak, and you think, well, that person who I'd normally make an effort to go and bring into the conversation one-on-one because they're not that confident to speak in a group, they've already slunk off. They've already left the Zoom chat, so you don't get that chance. And it's a little bit full on to go into a breakout room on Zoom and chat to someone. It's not that natural, just passing, pass the pizza or pass me a napkin or whatever. You can't have that natural segue into conversation.
I think back to events like Detroit Code, which David and myself had attended, and there was a specific moment at that event. I think it was during one of the conference meals where David and I had met Chris DeMars, who many of our viewers may know. And I'll let David talk about that story. But my point here being, opportunities like meeting folks like Chris aren't as likely to happen through a virtual format like Twitch. That's I guess just the chances of that are very low because there isn't that person-to-person communication.
Yeah, that natural, you bumped into them, you were turning around and you knocked their arm, and that natural segue into chat. And it's
right.
So
in this situation, Chris was sitting by himself at a table, and he happened to be wearing essentially the same outfit as David. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to just sit back and watch what happens here, but I'm willing to bet that these two are going to start talking to each other. And sure enough, they hit it off. A good friendship was formed at that event. And again, that's one thing that I feel like is extremely difficult to recreate in this virtual world.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I liked what David has said about, whisper a question to you. I like that on what you've done on the chat. That's really lovely.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's harder though to go the opposite direction, because what I had done with Chris was he was sitting by himself, and I walked up to him and sat down at the table and said, hey, you're sitting here by yourself. Is everything all right? Like, do you want to come join us and have a conversation and hang out, whatever? And he calls that our origin story. Like, we both had tattoos and flat built hats and matching shoes. So it's kind of funny. But even whispering in a chat like this, it's a lot more difficult. Like, if I just proactively was to go out to someone and whisper to them, like, how awkward would that be? Like, hey, I noticed you're in chat here and you're watching, but you haven't said anything. Do you want to have a conversation? It's a lot more difficult, right? Like, technology can't make that. It's different than in person.
Totally. Oh, I'm just now imagining that. So I'm just having a look in the chat. It is interesting what Silicone Orchard has said, that Twitch does encourage that interactivity, and I have found a lot more interactivity, and we've got repeat viewers, and it is a good way. People do feel confident because I guess they've got a pseudonym. When we do the meetup, we know their names, we know who they are, whereas there is that anonymity on Twitch, but you don't get the aggressive naysayers that I often see on YouTube. And you have great mods, people who care, and I do feel that there's a real community on Twitch.
Oh, absolutely. Like, this morning, like, you said mods, are those like moderators or?
Yes, moderators.
Okay. So I would love to have that. That's amazing that you've established such a huge following that people will dedicate their time to go moderate and help. And like, the entire time I'm watching, I'm like learning so much. I'm like, okay, so these people are on here, they're watching, they're helping, filter questions, and they're building out commands so that people can actually interact and do other things. And it's so much more interactive than other platforms, like you said. So I think that's incredible. And I would love to kind of follow up on my question I had for you during your stream this morning, which was like, what's your setup? And like, are you using OBS? And how do you, like, what music do you have? And what's the licensing for that? Because, oh my gosh, you're a pro.
Well, I'm part of the live coders. So we have a Discord for the live coders, and that was founded by Jeff Fritz. He's one of the sort of original live coders on Twitch. And so we have a lot of support. We share a lot of ideas on there. But then you need to be part of the live coders group, and not everybody is able to or wants to be. And I love that there's all that interactivity, and you can be silly as well. You know, like I have it raining dog heads on my stream, and I do a pair stream with another live coder, White Panther. We started it last week, and we're doing an episode tomorrow. And we're both on there, and we're talking about the processes behind code, not actually coding. And we have mods in there who are going through our chat and queuing up all the questions for us. So all we have to do is bring them in, and it feels like, hey, I'm doing proper production here. You feel like you're on TV and you're really building a community. So that's always very exciting to do that type of thing.
So we didn't, I don't think we touched on this earlier, but I'm curious, Layla, what were you doing before you got into this evangelism role? I'm curious what your background is that, you know, allows you to do what you do.
So before this, I was a senior web developer. So I worked on, my previous job was on the .NET Core stack. And I worked on like a student hall of residence booking system. So that was good. And I worked for a communication company before that, and then like a home furnishings company on their websites as well. So several ones with that. But previously, before I was a coder, I was a Pilates teacher, sports massage therapist, and a professional horse rider. So I've had quite the meandering career into coding.
How does one make that transition from horses and Pilates to code? Because that seems like there's not a lot of skills that we carry over.
Well, I've always enjoyed sort of technical stuff, and I've always been a logical thinker. So it was kind of, I enjoyed that flexing of my brain, so to speak, and being creative through different mediums. And basically, I earned peanuts. So all these gyms were opening up, which are 24 hours and £10 a month. And I was charging like £10 a class. So there was no way I could sustain my business. And I actually learned to code to manage my online booking system for my Pilates business. So I learned to code so I could add new queries in there and new pages and new features. And I was listening to a Code Newbie podcast actually, where this woman went from a journalist to be a coder, and I was like, oh, I could do that. I could switch careers, and it made it possible for me. So I dedicated a lot of time. I spent a lot of time on the Microsoft Virtual Academy, and learned to code that way.
Wow, that's really cool, and I feel like that's something that I don't think gets a lot. Well, it gets a lot, but it doesn't get enough enough attention. Is, you know, the cool thing about our field is you can hop into it really at any time from any other career. There's all this free training out there that you can get skilled up, you know, without having to invest a lot of money, and build a completely new career that, like you said, is generally, you know, pretty lucrative.
Absolutely.
The irony of that is there's so many other career paths out there that aren't celebrated in the way that being like a coder or a developer are. The fact that there's all these, you know, transition stories that are just celebrated from the community is amazing. Like, you never will see someone being like, oh, I was, you know, a professional rider and Pilates, and then ta-da, now I'm an accountant. And there's like this amazing celebration story about it. It's just like, oh, you're an accountant.
I think it's because the barriers of entry to learn to code are low. You don't have to have a degree. So if you want to be a certified accountant, you have to have these qualifications, or else you can't get insurance. But to be a developer, you can just go to a boot camp. You can buy a book. You can learn stuff. You can pick it up. And I think that's the big thing about code, is that you don't have to go and spend out on a degree. I wasn't fortunate enough to finish my degree. I lost funding. So in my final year of university, I couldn't finish it. So, you know, there's a lot of people out there who can't do that. White Panther's here. She was a music teacher. She's my co-host. And she was a music teacher in a school, and she's transitioned and now is a technical lead. And you hear these stories all the time because those barriers of entry are low to transition. And I think that's what's so amazing about coding.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. Like, there's so many people that are like, oh my gosh, you're a programmer, you're a developer, you're a coder, whatever. That is so hard to do. Like, it's a different language. Like, how do you, like, there's so many questions, right? But the fact that you're saying the bar is actually lower, that's one of the misconceptions I hope that we can dispel over time. So thank you. We're going to start our closing now. We've got about 5 minutes left. So are there any kind of prolific closing thoughts you'd like to end with?
Prolific, gosh. I don't know, David. Talk about putting me on the spot.
I'm good that way.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Maybe what if we remove the word prolific? Real-time regex string substitution here. Replace prolific with an empty string. What closing thoughts would you have, if any?
I guess that, you know, there's a lot of people like me who are trying to make content. And I said this was my first workshop. I lie. I made a workshop last year for complete beginners. So there's a lot of stuff out there for all levels. And if you go looking for it, and there's a lot of things that you can find, like Microsoft Learn, the documentation, and places where you can learn to code from complete scratch. One of the things I love most about Twilio Quest is it assumes zero knowledge of coding, and people have learned to code. There's basics of JavaScript, basics of Python on there, and I think if you have the will, there's a way to learn. You know, you can find that a time, whether it's an hour a week or 4 hours a day, you can make that transition if you want it.
I think that's really inspiring. And that is totally prolific. The fact that you can go from not having a workshop to developing a workshop from the ground up, from scratch, net new, and putting it all together. And that's awesome. It's amazing.
That really is. You know, having been in content development myself, developing things like workshops, like documentation, you know, I really find that creating that content works a different part of your brain. It forces you to empathize more with the customer and really put more thought into, okay, you know, this might make sense to me, but what does that look like from the student's perspective?
Yeah, you do have to think, you have to approach it and you think, actually, I'm assuming too much here. And so you have to really try to put away any ego. And I think empathy is really the biggest thing that you can have. And leave the egos at the door is what I always think when you go to a workshop, whether you're a mentor, an attendee, everyone's there to learn, everyone's there to help each other, whether you're an attendee or a mentor or the lead. Just have empathy and help each other with that. Yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing.
So, Dave, before we completely wind down, I know you had another additional bit of news that you wanted to share with our viewers.
Oh my gosh, that's totally right. I forgot about that. So yeah, big news. Thank you for watching and waiting all the way to the end for this big news. But the .NET Docs show is officially joining .NET TV. .NET TV hasn't even been formally announced or like formalized or anything like that, but you've probably been noticing on the Microsoft, we've got Learn TV. So .NET TV is going to be a thing. We're going to be rolling into the same branding as them, and it's eventual. Our schedule's updated. We're going to be going from Thursdays to Mondays in the near future. So look for schedule changes there. But it's going to be massive. We're going to be joining the likes of the .NET Community Stand-Up and On .NET and C# Fritz and others, and it's going to be amazing. So we're super, super humbled, honored, and excited for this, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it even much more.
Yeah, I'm really super stoked about it.
Yeah, I think part of the goal here is to start to drive more traffic to our Microsoft-owned properties instead of just doing our own thing. Up to this point, it's sort of been a rogue effort where, we've selfishly been driving traffic to our own YouTube channel. But, we took a step back and we realized in talking to our mentors, White Panther points out the importance of mentors in the chat here. We realized in talking to our mentors that it was just a better idea to contribute to that larger effort and drive traffic to the .NET owned properties.
Yep.
Awesome.
So I guess with that, we'll close it down, huh, guys?
Sounds good. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yep. See you
Thank
next
you
week.
for having me.
Thank you, Layla, so much.